We turn now to the first of two Republican governors joining us today, New Hampshire's Chris Sununu, who announced last week that he would not be a candidate for president. Welcome, Governor. Thank you for being with us. You've taken a look at the indictment.
You bet.
Do you think that the current frontrunner of the Republican nomination should be given the responsibility to handle the most sensitive national security documents again with re-election?
Well, I guess we're going to find out. Yeah, I mean, look, if half of what they say they can prove is provable, then he's got a real problem on our hands, and it's self-inflicted. Let's remember that. This is he had every chance in the world to hand all those files and documents back. He did just the opposite. He bragged about keeping them. So this is very self-inflicted. I mean, I guess we'll find out of the 37 or whatever charges there are, how many he's potentially found guilty on. So we'll see where it goes and what's disqualifying and not. But I think, you know, that last segment you had was really telling. It's just another example that he could win the nomination, but mathematically cannot win in November of 24, which is why the Republican Party needs to look to another candidate, and they've got a lot of great options before him.
This seems to provide an opportunity for them to not look to another candidate because they are rallying around him. I want to read you something from the National Review, which wrote about this indictment. It is impossible to read the indictment against Trump in the Mar-a-Lago document case and not be appalled by it. The way he handled classified documents as an ex-president and responded to the attempt by federal authorities to reclaim them. You seem to share that view, but many, the majority in your party and the majority of public officials, have exactly the opposite view.
Yeah, so this is the problem that the Department of Justice has. And whether you want to agree with it or not doesn't matter. The reality is a lot of people are looking at that kind of cloud that sits over the DOJ and says there has been a little too much politics in that department over the past couple of years. There's been a lot of allegations of political handling. So they have the responsibility to say, look, this is different. This is much more severe. And I think they have to do that.
Let me ask you this, Governor. But first of all, the Department of Justice is investigating the sitting president. There's a special counsel. So the same standard is applied to him. And isn't it not the Department of Justice that's applying a different standard, but the politicians who are the same ones in some cases, Kevin McCarthy and others, who are applying a standard to Donald Trump that they did not apply to others? Hillary Clinton being the primary one.
Yeah, but you can't equivocate. Yeah, if I may, you can't equivocate the two, right? So you have folks on the equate the two. Sorry, but look, those are politicians. They're on the Republican side for the most part. They're going to defend a political position. The DOJ has a responsibility to be above it all, and should be, and historically has been, but recently has not been. And so the average American watches this. You and I are in the weeds, right? We're talking about this issue all the time over the last 48 hours. The average American's looking at this thing for 90 seconds. And they're saying, wait a minute, they found files over there. They found a server in Clinton's bathtub over there. They found files over here. What's the difference? And there is a very clear difference. There's a huge difference. But it has to be explained to the American people.
But I mean, Governor, that's like saying New York and New Hampshire are the same because they have the word new in their titles. I mean, there are great differences in terms of obstruction of justice in the cases of, say, President Biden and the case of President Trump, former President Trump. So let me ask you, but we're going to run out of time, unfortunately. So hold on. We're going to get you on the other side of the half hour, and we'll come back to this. We're going to take a break. Stay right there. We've got more when we come back to Face the Nation. Welcome back to Face the Nation. We return now to the Republican governor of New Hampshire, Chris Sununu. Governor, we were talking about the uniform application of standards, whether it's by politicians or the Department of Justice. The former Attorney General, Bill Barr, weighed in on this question on Fox News when he was asked about whether this is politically motivated. He said, I defended the president on Russiagate. I stood up and called out Alvin Bragg, that's the Manhattan District Attorney, politicizing the hit job, and I have spoken out for 30 years about the abuse of criminal justice process to influence politics. But this is simply not true. So you have the former Attorney General saying that these charges of weaponization are not true. I wonder what you think a responsible politician looking at the evidence before us should say about the Department of Justice, and whether there's any danger in saying weaponization when you have a former Attorney General saying, no, this is on the level.
No, I think that's a great point. I think Bill Barr is absolutely right. I don't see this as being political, but again, the point I keep going back to is the average person may still think it's political, and a lot of people clearly do. And so if you're going to take unprecedented steps like this, as valid as they are, then they have to, again, acknowledge the responsibility of showing all sides of it, showing how it's not political, not just saying, don't worry, it's not political. They've done that before, and it didn't work out so well. So they have the responsibility of showing how it isn't political, to give that calm, to give that confidence and that trust in the system. So when this goes forward, and if and when he is found guilty, there's trust that it was done the right way.
As a politician of good faith, what is one's responsibility when surveying this? When you know it's not a weaponization, when you know there's no evidence of weaponization, what should you say to the public? The public may feel one thing, but if the facts of the case suggest more complexity and gray areas, what does a politician of good faith say to the public?
Yeah, well, look, I'm a big believer. Everyone has to be very straightforward and transparent about it and acknowledge the realities of the severity of these accusations and these allegations, and the fact that they're very real, they're self-inflicted. This is nothing like anything we've seen before, and there's very likely, I think, going to come down to some type of guilty verdict on the president, at least on some of these charges. And so, again, we all have that responsibility. Now, who takes that? Who wants to play political games? That's, I guess, everyone, unfortunately, will tend to do that on both sides of the aisle. By the way, you just have to acknowledge both sides of this. You really do.
Let me move on to the state of New Hampshire, the first primary. You want to change the conversation away from Donald Trump and to get some other candidates and perhaps get another nominee. Does this focus in the rallying around the former President Trump make that more difficult?
It makes it more difficult, but look, my message to all the candidates is very clear. You better come out, just as you acknowledge. You have to come out, and they have to come out and acknowledge this is different, this is serious. If even half of this stuff is true, he's in real trouble, and it is self-inflicted. And I just see too many of the candidates trying to walk around it. We'll see what happens. To your point, you have to be clear and transparent. You're running against this guy. He's whooping you by 40 points. Everybody needs to come out in concert. So it's not just a Chris Christie hitting Donald Trump or this candidate hitting Donald Trump. It is a party message. That's very, very important, because Donald Trump doesn't represent the Republican Party. He only represents himself. And so that is shown when all the candidates come out equally and unequivocally talking about this issue in the right way.
Did you mention that to Governor Burgum when you had breakfast with him this morning?
Absolutely. Look, Doug is an incredible governor. I think he's going to be a great candidate. He's hitting the ground running with all the things that you need to be successful. And a lot of the other candidates are kind of turning their machines on and starting to hit the ground. So we'll see where it all goes. But I think Doug's a great governor, and he's going to kind of be a spark to watch this fall.
Another person you met with this week got into the race, former Vice President Mike Pence. Here's the thing that puzzles me. He is, by every measure of the old style of politics, a good old-fashioned conservative. And yet the polling consistently shows that though protesters at those who attacked the Capitol on January 6th called for his hanging, he seems to have paid a political price for that, more than the person who led to the circumstances that had them call for his hanging, which is to say his former boss. What does that say about the nature of things?
Well, look, all the candidates are a little bit different, but I think you have three candidates in a similar position, all great people, great candidates. Nikki Haley, Chris Christie, former Vice President Pence. These are all folks that were on the Trump team, right? And now they're kind of off the team, and they're all running against him. So they each just have to make their cases. They know how to run a ground game. They know how to talk to folks with a sense of authenticity about what it is and what has changed between then and now. But each of those candidates are in, I think, a similar position, will have to make their case as to why they not just have earned the job, but what's going to spark them? What's going to spark them about beyond 5, 6, 7% in the polls to get people excited this fall?
All right, Governor Chris Sununu, thank you so much for being here. We'll be talking to you again for sure. Appreciate it. And we'll be right back. 3 more Republicans jumped into the presidential primary race last week. North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum was one of them. He is campaigning in New Hampshire and joins us from Manchester. Good morning, Governor. Thank you for being with us. You're trying to break through. All candidates running against Donald Trump are. This indictment, whatever you may think about the details of it, creates an opportunity to talk about the responsibilities, obligations, and character of the job. So is it an opportunity for you, and what are you going to do with it?
Well, John, you've written eloquently about the the presidency being the hardest job in the world. And I think part of your thesis was priorities, and this is something that we've been talking about. We're on day 4 on the campaign trail. Been talking about that, and it sort of we make sure that people understand, who we are, why we're running, and what we'll do. And who we are. I'm a small town kid in North Dakota. I've had jobs growing up where you shower at the end of the day, not at the beginning of the day. Went from those small town roots. My dad died when I was a freshman in high school. I got a little bit of farmland, mortgaged that. That became the seed capital for a startup software company, which grew into a $1 billion company with small town kids from all over North Dakota working for that company. And we had 130,000 customers and 120 companies. It's like one of these only in America type stories. And the reason why we're running is we know that now, having been governor the last 6.5 years, I know when you're in the top spot in an executive role, how you pick your priorities, what you focus on. You have an opportunity to improve the life of every citizen, and that's what we're planning on doing, is improving the life of every American and bringing out the best of America. And how we're going to do that is we're going to focus on 3 things. The economy, it's touching everybody right now. Energy policy, that touches everybody right now and completely related to national security. Those 3 things are interrelated, and right now we feel it's not just a course correction, but the Biden administration is 180 degrees in the wrong direction on the economy, on energy policy, and on national security. And that's what we're going to focus on and talk about in our campaign.
And that's when you wake up every day as a chief executive who's been handed the responsibility by the people of North Dakota. You have a certain obligation to the office, you feel. You've talked about it. Would you do anything like what's alleged in this indictment about former President Trump?
Well, I've only made one campaign promise so far, and that's if elected, I will get down to the southern border in the first 2 weeks, not take 2 years like Biden did. And I can also tell you that when president and when we leave the office, that we will follow every rule related to handling classified documents.
Governor Sununu was just on. He said he had a good breakfast with you, but he said this is a competition. There's only one top spot. You're in the business world. You can't just get a little bit of market share. You have to get the most and biggest share. And his argument is that candidates like you have to make a clear distinction with the front runner. And this is a pretty big opportunity, particularly for somebody talking about the values they were imbued with by living in a small town, to make a moral claim about the office and the attributes required for it, but you're not.
Well, I think obviously the way we've conducted ourselves when I was a CEO, when I've been governor, when you have the responsibility, the top spot, it's important to make sure that you're not only doing a great job for the people you're serving, but when you're the office holder for a period of time, and there's a dignity and a discipline that goes with being a governor and goes with being the president. And certainly we would strive to uphold that going forward, because it's such a key institution going forward. But yeah, absolutely. That's what we'd be focusing on, making sure we're doing that. And like I said, you've written about the importance of that.
Let me ask you about a moment from you had an interview with the Fargo Forum in which you said that there is a silent majority that's being neglected. Quoting you, all the engagement right now is occurring on the edge. What did you mean?
Well, I think it's not just silent. Governor Spencer Cox of Utah doesn't call it the silent majority, it's the exhausted majority. But the majority of Americans and the people that are touched every day by these issues of inflation, of government red tape, of high gas prices, of an open border, it's affecting every American. They're not on social media. They're not watching the cable news programs. That's the majority of Americans. And so I think, again, in the tech world, we always said, hey, when you're building a global world-class company from nothing, you've got to separate what's signal and what's noise. And there's a lot of noise, and a lot of that noise is in the echo chambers on the edges, and that exhausted majority in the middle, they're yearning for leadership that's going to come and talk to them and listen to them about the issues that are affecting them in their everyday lives. And just in the few short days we've been on the trail, we know that in the 2 days in Iowa, yesterday here in New Hampshire, there are people that want to talk about the issues facing this country and how it affects them in their lives every day.
During the COVID pandemic, in the toughest part of it, you talked about masks, and you said that everybody needed to be empathetic towards those who might wear it. You said, dial up your empathy and your understanding. Are there other issues in the world you see today in domestic politics where you would apply that same guidance for people?
Well, when we talk about the best of America, growing up in a small town, the best of America is when neighbors help neighbors. When a farmer in North Dakota falls ill, the neighbors rally around, whether it's to get the crop planted or the crop harvested. You know, every spring in western North Dakota in the Badlands, when it's time for spring branding and Roundup, the neighbors show up. They couldn't get the work done if they weren't neighbors helping neighbors. And we need to get back to that. And I think part of what, you know, our real enemies, you know, when we talk about China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, they love it when we're fighting with each other. They love it when we're just, you know, throwing insults back and forth at each other. But we have to approach, and one of the bywords we have in our administration is curiosity. Curiosity to understand where the other person is coming from. And with that, it also, I know America has built its economy around innovation. And we have the Biden administration completely focused on regulating our industries out of business as opposed to focusing on innovation. And the way you get to innovation is you get there through curiosity and understanding that everybody can contribute to the conversation.
All right, Governor Doug Burgum, thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate it. Good luck out on the campaign trail, and we'll be back in a moment with our panel. And we're back with our Elections and Surveys Director, Anthony Salvanto, and we're also joined by Cook Political Report's Amy Walter, as well as our senior White House and political correspondent, Ed O'Keefe. It's good to be with all of you. Anthony, I'm going to start with you. More numbers. Give us the top line number of the Republican field right now.
So Donald Trump is still on top, comfortably, and in two important ways. One, very simply, in vote choice. He's at 61% when people say who they would support right now. But in another very important way, in consideration. That's when people can pick multiple candidates, one more if they like, because this is a point in the campaign where they're evaluating things more generally, and he's up in that consideration too.
So there's not a special second candidate that's hiding in the wings according to consideration. But don't answer that, because I want to ask you, in terms of what the former president is talking about, is it what people want to hear?
No. In a short answer. They don't want to hear him talk about 2020. They don't want to hear him talk about himself or the past. They want to hear him talk about plans for the country. And yet, he's still leading.
Yep. Amy, what do you make of that in this current context where there's the first indictment of a former president, federal indictment?
I think there are two things. One is, if the leadership of the party and his own rivals are echoing what Trump is saying about this indictment. This is politically motivated. This is rigged. This is a witch hunt. Why should we believe that voters are going to feel any differently? So they're kind of all following each other in this. And the other one about why are they not talking about the number one issue? If you talk to the folks in and around, say, the DeSantis campaign, they believe the only way to go and chip away at Trump support is to go at him from the right on some of these cultural issues. Yeah. That's where they see him as most vulnerable. And when you talk about the economy, voters overwhelmingly, I'm sure you've seen this in your polling already, Anthony, voters in the Republican primary think that Trump did a great job on the economy. So trying to out-economy him is going to be very difficult.
And also, he may not have to talk about it much. They're like, yep, he's our guy. We've checked that box. He can talk about whatever he wants because we've assumed he's going to do a great job. And this is where the
governor that you just interviewed where Burgum is trying to make his case that, look, I'm actually the business guy. I've actually done this. I'm going to address those issues. Getting that traction, though, is going to be very difficult when we still are focused much more on what's going on with Trump than anybody other candidate.
I want to ask about that blocking, which we talked a little bit about with Governor Sununu. Ed, you've been out on the trail. There are some of former President Trump's rivals who are trying to make the moral case, who are trying to make, how's that going for them?
Not very well, as you can see in these numbers. I mean, 1%, right, for Asa Hutchinson. Chris Christie, probably too early to measure. What I was struck by is that the top five there in the consideration category, so it was Trump, DeSantis, Tim Scott, Mike Pence, Nikki Haley. Those are the names I heard from voters, the five of them. And so that sort of gives you a sense that at this point, maybe that's the ball game, right? That Trump is obviously double digits ahead of all of them. But if anybody else right now in name ID, staffing operations has a shot at Iowa and New Hampshire, it's probably those five right now. I'm struck, too, by Governor Burgum's decision this week to come out and say, I'm going to talk about the economy, energy, and national security. In some ways, energy bleeds into the other two. So maybe really he's just running for energy secretary one day. But he's made a point, and it's just been proven in the polling, that most voters want to be listening to candidates talk about inflation and the economy, which for more than a year, right, has been the number one concern.
And when you get there, by the way, that's what's on your plate.
Right.
The stuff he's talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, I mean, first of all, it always feels good when the reporter on the ground is seeing the same things we're seeing in the polling. But look, when you list out for folks what they want in a president, in the abstract, right? And for Republicans, it's been someone who challenges woke ideas. It's also been someone who has economic plans or can make the economy better, et cetera. Whatever it is, Donald Trump is your guy. And so you can sort of wrap that up. And they say, do they want someone like Donald Trump? They want someone similar to Donald Trump? They say yes, and he's running.
You know what's interesting? You mentioned that, though. The woke, the attack on woke is an attack. We don't have a lot of candidates, and Tim Scott is the other one. But Governor Burgum is hey, actually, I'm going to show you about where I came from and these American values in a small town with 400 people and building it's the old optimistic message that in the old days, every candidate had to have one. Right. Now it's basically Burgum and Scott.
That's right. That they want, Republican voters want somebody who's going to fight for them. Because if you do believe as a Republican voter that the system itself is rigged, that we, as are these voters, we are being basically oppressed by whoever you want to put in that category. Coastal elites, the folks who run the Justice Department, all of them are against us. We need somebody who's going to fight for us. The other thing, just going back to the economy, I heard this a lot from Republicans after the election. They looked at the data that's in 2022, that election. They looked at the data that said, number one issue is inflation, we're going to win. But you listen to the voters and what they said was, well, we never heard what your plan was, right? We knew that, yeah, we don't think Biden's doing a great job on inflation, but what are you going to do about it?
Ed, let me pick up on something Amy just said, which is interesting. So some people say, well, the Republicans have rallied around Donald Trump. He's under threat. But what if the way this is being framed by Republicans, which is this is all partisan, this is all a manipulation of the system, creates an appetite for Donald Trump? In other words, if it's all rigged, we want the best rigger in the game on our side.
Well, if that's the case, then I think the polling continues to show us they can nominate him, but he may be set up to lose again. Because overall, in the general election, we're seeing Americans overall believe that this was justified, that he should be prosecuted, right? And then, of course, he lost last time, and there's nothing yet that suggests that he would win a general election other than perhaps some horse race numbers this early. The one thing I think gives Democrats reason to be hopeful about those general election matchups, you asked about attributes in a president, who you want, or what characteristics you want in a president. Topping the list was truthfulness, right? Character and empathy. At the bottom of that list was someone who's articulate, energetic, and youthful, right? So if you're the Biden campaign right now, you go, oh, they want the truthful, truth-telling, character, that's us, right? We're not the articulate, youthful one. So that whole argument's gone away. That's why they remain hopeful that if it is Trump, they can still win this thing.
And what are they saying inside the Democratic Party about their nominee?
Well, what's interesting about Biden is, okay, he's at 41% approval. He's been in the low 40s for a while. To Ed's point, he does better in approval with folks who want a president that is calm, predictable, right, and steady. And those are all things that if you go back to 2020 were selling points for him. Yeah. All right. But now the question is going to be, does that necessarily meet the moment? And there are concerns among Democrats about whether he should run again. And you get 4 in 10 Democrats in this survey saying that they don't think that he should. And their concern is about his second term.
Is this just a repeat, Amy, of 2020?
It sure feels that way, doesn't it?
Structurally,
it structurally
well
feels that we are going to be fighting and talking about the same types of voters, right? These voters who may not be in love with Joe Biden, but feel as the job that he's doing, but feel as if they have little choice but to vote for him because they don't think the alternative is acceptable. In 2016, or maybe it's a little bit like 2016, are we going to see that repeat where you have a significant number of people that say, I dislike both candidates, but at the end of the day, I'm going to have to go with this person. So you have a whole bunch of people who are even more dispirited about their choice than were in 2020, where people were a little bit more optimistic, at least, about who they were choosing to vote for. But this thing about Biden that has always been the case is even in 2020, the significant number of people who voted for him said, I only voted for him because he wasn't Donald Trump. So there's never been this cult of personality around Joe Biden like we saw around Obama, like we obviously see around Donald Trump. So rallying support for Biden has always been about the other rather than about Biden.
And you cover the White House. Obviously, Joe Biden's not talking about this, and they won't say anything about it. But one thing that struck me is he had developed some kind of relationship with the Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, through the debt ceiling negotiations. But now Kevin McCarthy is coming out at the sort of the furthest edge of response and saying this is being led by the president, of which there's no evidence. What does that mean for lawmaking life in Washington going forward?
I think the White House understands that Kevin McCarthy has a real problem holding his own caucus together. And there are Freedom Caucus, arch-conservative members who needed to hear the Speaker say those things in the wake of the debt ceiling agreement. Remember, the House was sent home early this past week because they couldn't move some very simple things through amid the conservative opposition to the debt limit deal. By saying what he said, he's appeasing those guys in hopes that they can all come back next week and get things moving again. The president, the White House understand that McCarthy has to be out there talking, appeasing these people. But at the end of the day, they believe when it comes to a government shutdown threat potentially in September and all the other things they'll have to do, they'll find a way to do it because ultimately chaos just doesn't favor Congress as it's currently constructed.
So they're not taking it personal, just
No,
business.
not this president.
Amy, Ed, and Anthony, thank you so much, and we'll be right back. CBS News will have special coverage during the day, and the CBS Evening News will originate from Miami on Tuesday as former President Trump makes his first court appearance there. That's scheduled for 3 p.m. Thank you for watching today. Margaret will be back next week. For Face the Nation, I'm John Dickerson.